Singapore is renowned as an Asian powerhouse, boasting a clean government, a thriving economy and social cohesion. Much of this nation's prosperity has been attributed to the People's Action Party, or the PAP, which has been in power for nearly 50 years. But critics say Singapore's success has come at the expense of freedom of expression and real democracy. This year's general election sees an unprecedented number of opposition candidates contesting, reflecting a groundswell of discontent against the PAP. I'm FAUZIAH IBRAHIM. On this edition of 101 East, we ask, is Singapore ready for a political change? Singapore is a country constantly on the move. This city-state has risen from a struggling island to attain first-world status in just over 50 years. Here, hard work is the nation's ethos, and its people have been rewarded with a safe, stable, comfortable home.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us put our hands together to welcome our Prime Minister, Lee Hsien Loong. PAP! PAP!
Many credit the ruling People's Action Party, or PAP, for Singapore's prosperity. This is the party that has been in power since the nation gained independence from Malaysia in 1965. But some Singaporeans think it's time to change.
This generation of voters, we are born comfortable. We have all the things that we need, but now we're moving on to what we feel as a person, our own values. You know, we want diversity in Parliament. We want representation of what we feel.
27-year-old media consultant Scott TENG is a first-time voter. Like many young Singaporeans, Scott is plugged into the social media and says it shows many of his peers want less emphasis on economic progress.
Our policies would definitely do very strongly grounded on economic benefits, but then people is something that they have been neglecting. We are looking beautiful on the outside, but inside, in the heartland where nobody sees, are all these poor people who our growth and our policies have not been reaching.
Among those left behind by Singapore's success is Zaini bin Hamid, born with cerebral palsy, though he doesn't allow his daily struggles to dampen his ambitions.
I want a job. I want to have a salary of my own. I want to be able to have my own savings. I want to be able to live as other people do.
But Zaini says most employers are reluctant to hire a disabled person. He says he's tried applying for government aid but has been turned down or ignored. His wife brings in $650 a month as a childcare worker, barely enough for the couple to live on.
Life in Singapore looks easy and fantastic from the outside. But in my opinion, that's only for the people with education, people with opportunities, those who live and work in skyscrapers. But people like me who have no opportunity, no education, I feel like we are cast aside, forgotten.
Zaini hopes the elections will help improve his circumstances.
For so many years, this government has not helped me. No matter how many times I've asked for help, I feel such shame asking for help.
Zaini's plight may be difficult, but critics say many other Singaporeans are falling through the cracks of the system. Real wages have failed to keep up with inflation despite the government boasting an impressive 14.7% GDP growth. Singapore's income gap is one of the largest in the developed world and is growing wider. Public housing, once widely affordable, has become increasingly out of reach for many, causing Singaporeans to become frustrated with the PAP.
They have come across as unsympathetic to many of the concerns that intellectually they know, but for some reason feel that should not overwhelm what they consider to be their fundamentals. Essentially, this is a government that wants Singapore to remain very friendly to business, to multinationals, and I think no matter what it hears from the ground, it's not going to depart from that.
Among those who have taken advantage of Singapore's business-friendly policies is Simon Littlewood, now a permanent resident. He arrived in Singapore in 1993 and, impressed by its efficient infrastructure, developed a global management consultancy firm.
I couldn't have set that company up, or it would have been very hard to set that company up with the same degree of success and rate of growth that I've been able to achieve here, for lots of reasons. For reasons of infrastructure, because of the tax structure, because of the ability to travel easily.
Simon says he understands the resentment felt towards foreigners who today make up 1/5 of the population. Many Singaporeans accuse them of depriving locals of jobs, depressing wages and putting a strain on public infrastructure. But Simon says Singapore only has itself to blame.
It's hard to find talent in my métier or in any métier which requires original thinking, flexibility. Those things are very much in short supply in Singapore, sadly, because part of the successes, one key ingredient of the success of Singapore has been that the system, starting with the education system, is extremely prescriptive. People in Singapore are taught what to think. Okay, in that sense, people in Singapore are not educated; they're trained. Okay, and training is not enough.
Simon feels that the nation's education system, which is largely based on rote learning, works to the advantage of the ruling PAP.
Here's the thing, I'm invested in Singapore. I've been here for 18 years, both my children have been raised here. I love this country and I really would like it to succeed, and I don't think it's being given the fair shot. I think people are capable of change. It's not the Singapore that it was in the 1960s, you know. It's not going to fall apart the moment that you give people the chance to express a view on their own.
One of the reasons for Singapore's success has been because the PAP has gone largely unchallenged in Parliament. This has allowed the party to implement long-term national development policies. But critics say over the years, the People's Action Party has become dogmatic in their approach, with some even accusing the party of going to draconian lengths to quash any challenge to their authority. Kenneth JEYARATNAM of the Opposition Reform Party knows too well the consequences of challenging the PAP. His late father, JB JEYARATNAM, was the first opposition member in Singapore's parliament in 1988. The senior JEYARATNAM's outspoken character often landed him in legal tussles with the ruling party.
The government often says that the climate of fear is imaginary, but the climate of fear exists. People who've stood for significant opposition figures, including my father, have been bankrupted through libel suits. The fact that the government controls, or government-linked companies control so much of the economy, which puts people in fear that if they were to engage in alternative political activity, they might lose their jobs.
The PAP defends their strict policies on political expression, saying such measures are needed to ensure harmony in Singapore's multiracial, multi-religious society. The result is that many Singaporeans are reluctant to openly criticize the government. But in the last few years, political blogs and websites have sprung up, providing a sounding board for Singaporeans who feel the PAP is out of touch with the electorate.
I think the general climate of fear is dissipating thanks to the internet in part, which has, I think, allowed Singaporeans to essentially have their say, still mostly anonymously though. Many Singaporeans would still be reluctant to take on the government too openly. The Singapore government's interpretation of defamation law, for example, is very well known. So it does not give a wide allowance to political speech.
One person prepared to stand against the PAP is Tan Ji Say of the Singapore Democratic Party. This government scholar rose through government ranks to serve directly under former Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong. But Tan says he found himself at odds with the ruling party's policies.
A lot of people have tried that to change from within, but it's not possible because the government is quite domineering. And they feel that what they do is right because years of success have given them a certain kind of arrogance. I think the government has lost its moral compass in setting up 2 big casinos and in allowing a massive influx of foreign workers into Singapore.
Tan is one of a record number of opposition candidates running in this election, with 82 out of 87 parliamentary seats being contested. It's the strongest electoral challenge to the ruling party since Singapore gained independence in 1965.
For a long time, Singapore has been associated with an extremely watertight establishment, an elite that, with virtually no cracks. If you like, what's happening in Singapore now is a step towards normalcy, where individuals within the establishment are beginning to disagree with the party line. And the tip of the iceberg, of course, is the small minority that are going all the way and challenging the government.
Tan says the large number of opposition candidates will shake the ruling party out of its complacency.
They are hanging on to policies of the past and they feel that there's no need to change. I think it is changing in increasing numbers now. I think people are prepared to have a change, to take a chance with change.
Tens of thousands of Singaporeans have been attending opposition rallies, including Scott and his friends. At the rally for the National Solidarity Party, the star speaker is NICOLE SEAH, who, at age 24, is the youngest candidate contesting. And like Scott, NICOLE is seeking political change.
Do not let the PAP tell us that they know what is best.
Singapore runs on this concept of what you call a representative democracy. The problem is the selection process of the members of parliament, especially for the incumbent party, has always been based on factors such as how well has the person served in the military, what kind of scholarships does the person hold, did the person graduate from an Ivy League university like Oxford or Cambridge. But I think that the problem with such qualifiers is that people tend to forget that if you are in a certain position, if you mix around a certain type of people, you tend to forget how the rest of average Singaporeans live their lives, the kind of problems that they face on the ground. So I think that there has been a growing disconnect between the incumbent and a lot of Singaporeans.
NICOLE says that Singapore has achieved its goal of being a first world nation and should now focus on helping those left behind in the nation's progress, like Zaini.
Saya rasa saya tertindas sangat-sangat.
I feel downtrodden. I feel like we are living in a dirty cage and there's no way out because there's no one to help us.
The election, saya nak perubahan.
I hope with this election, my life changes. I want to be able to ask for help and receive it, not like in previous elections. I don't want to continue living like this again.
As Singapore continues to move forward and mature, its people are now demanding its leaders listen to their collective voice on the direction the country is heading. For more on Singapore's general election, we've come to a coffee shop, locally known as a kopitiam, where Singaporeans traditionally go to discuss politics. Joining us now is Eugene Tan, Assistant Professor of Law at the Singapore Management University. And Siew Kum Hong is a former nominated Member of Parliament and is now with the political discussion website, The Online Citizen. Well, thank you very much for joining us today at the Kopitiam. Eugene, if I could start with you. 50 years of this one single party in power for this long. How is it that the People's Action Party has managed to stay in power for this long?
I think it boils down to the PAP having performance legitimacy, the fact that it has been able to deliver generally on the goals that it had promised. I think it has also remained relatively corruption-free, so I think there is, in a way, a strong degree of trust, and that has enabled, the People's Action Party to rule for such a long time. And of course, the fact that it has been able to rule effectively and in a generally fair manner, I think that has earned it a lot of credit and trust.
Kum Hong, you'd agree with that as well? Is that why it's the credit and trust that they've earned from the electorate?
I think to a very, very large extent, absolutely, right. If you look at Singapore 10, 20 years ago, very different place. I know my life has changed a lot for the better under this system that we have. But I also want to say that I think you can't ignore the fact that the PAP has adopted tactics in the past that have allowed it to maintain this degree of power. For example, detentions under the ISA, the Internal Security Act, which were for preventive detentions for conspiracies that were never proven, where no one was ever brought to trial. and just a general climate of fear that all these things have engendered, as well as a real state control of the mass media. So these are the contributing factors that have allowed the PAP to stay in power.
You're talking about this control that this one particular political party has had in this country, but that's what has made this country to where it is now. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree with that, but I also say that's what's going to hold us back in the next 50 years. And I think that climate of fear and all the controls that we have had in place have held back the population in terms of being creative, innovative, just thinkers, right? And that's going to hold us back if we don't do something about that quickly.
I think certainly Singapore society is changing fairly dramatically. You're talking about a well-traveled, well-educated, and of course with new media, the fact that Singaporeans are exposed to what's happening in other places. And I think for many young Singaporeans, the idea of one party being in control for 50 years and in a way not showing any signs of losing grip strikes many as an anomaly. I think for some, it's actually a sort of a freakish political sort of state of affairs, and I think ultimately, I think there is that desire for a diversity of voices.
What it sounds like is that this party has been in power for this long, and this party, People's Action Party, says, we know what's good for you. Do you think that's been the case? Do you think that that's changing now in Singapore? Do you think Singaporeans say, no, we know what's best for us?
I think you're spot on there. And I think within the party, there are probably elements who recognize that, this paternalistic, top-down, we know what's best for you kind of approach isn't going to work in the future. But unfortunately, I think a large part of the party is still kind of used to the ways of the past and did not come around to think that. But definitely for the younger generations of Singaporeans, to be told what to do, how to think, what we should do, that is something that's very, I would even say, repulsive to us, and we react very strongly to that.
Let's talk about the opposition now. There is a groundswell. There is an unprecedented number of opposition candidates that are running in this particular general election. Why is that? Where did they come from?
It's in a way a maturing of Singapore's political society. I suppose with a more educated, a more confident society, more Singaporeans are not willing to buy the PAP government line. They do believe that there are alternatives which perhaps have not been really looked at carefully. So I think in a way it reflects a certain confidence among the people. It reflects a coming of age, right? And so many Singaporeans feel that they can make a difference and are now willing to step forth. I suppose that may also suggest that the climate of fear is in a way weakening.
I want to take you up on that issue of the climate of fear, which everybody talks about here in Singapore. Is it really, one, is it a myth? Did it exist? And two, if it did exist, is it dissipating? Is it disappearing now?
I think it exists in the sense that Singaporeans, there are a lot of Singaporeans who feel it. When I talk to people, there are people who are scared, right? There is, I would say there's some merit to the argument that for a lot of people, the climate of fear is a convenient excuse for not jumping in and getting involved. It's just easier to say, hey, the government, something's going to happen to me, so I'd rather not get involved, right? But at the same time, I think over the past 10, 20 years, the climate of fear has been gradually dissipating, and a lot of that is because of, I think, the government and the ruling party understanding that in this new world that we live in, which is connected by the internet, where we need to maintain a certain standing, we, meaning Singapore, needs to maintain a certain standing in the community of nations, that some of the tactics in the past are not going to fly anymore.
Something that I find interesting is that Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong recently said that a two-party system could be divisive in multi-ethnic Singapore. Do you think Singaporeans are sophisticated enough to be able to vote on a candidate based on merit rather than race or religion?
Yeah, I think race and religion are sort of fear factors, that the government likes to leverage on. I think when you look at the Singapore's political scene, other than one party which is race-based, all the other parties are not organized along racial or religious lines. So I think again, there is the concern, right? That if you have a competitive political system, that for parties to win votes, race and religion become convenient factors that they can tap on. I think the fear, the concern is there, but I feel that it's perhaps a bit exaggerated. That I think in the end, Singaporeans are mature enough, not to support this sort of politics, because I think it will just do us in.
Right. Kum Hong, you'd agree with that as well?
I absolutely agree with that.
That Singaporeans have reached a stage now that they no longer see race or religion of the candidate?
I wouldn't say they don't see the race and religion of the candidate, but that's not going to be the decisive factor. They're going to look at the candidate, they're going to evaluate the candidate as a whole, and they're not going to say, hey, this guy's an Indian, he can't speak for me, so I'm not going to vote for him. I don't think that's the way now. Definitely not for the younger Singaporeans. And as the generations change, I think that's going to become more pronounced. And this constant harping on race and religion is, I think, a mistake by the government.
This is something that we've acknowledged a little earlier on, that there is no doubt that Lee Kuan Yew and his team has battled many challenges to get Singapore to where it is now. What about the future leaders of Singapore? What challenges are they going to face?
Lee Kuan Yew and his generation grew up in an environment in which they were severely tested. Right? It was a battle for life and death, even if that may sound dramatic. I think it has become more now a battle of ideas rather than a battle for life and death. And I think when you take away that existential challenge, I think people are beginning to be a bit more willing to explore, to experiment. And I think politically, I think that's where people are beginning to show some amount of initiative and say, hey, maybe we should conceptualize society in a different way, or maybe we can do things in a different way, that will make us a lot more vibrant, to make our political existence a lot more secure, rather than just depending on one political party. So 20, 50 years ago, one could say, we got to place all our eggs in the PAP basket. I think now maybe the Singapore population is more willing, right? Singaporeans are more willing to consider alternatives and actually see that the idea of having different baskets may actually enable Singapore to do better, and avoid getting into that sort of existential trap. Are we going to make it if the PAP were to become corrupt?
What do you think, Kum Hong? What are the challenges for the future leaders of Singapore?
I think what the average Singaporean has some difficulty accepting is that the consequences of having so many foreigners in Singapore have not been well thought through by the government, and so it impacts the average Singaporean on a day-to-day basis. For example, crowded public transport, cost of living, housing, so on and so forth.
There is that rational understanding of why Singaporeans need immigrants, but I think there isn't that emotional buy-in yet. I think people feel that citizenship may not mean as much, when we are letting in, giving out permanent residence, giving out citizenships, in a fairly liberal manner. So
really, moving on from here, this general election, moving on, Singapore and Singaporeans are going to start to think, what does it mean to be Singaporean? What is Singapore? What is our national identity?
Yes, and I think when they think of that, they're going to want more inclusiveness in the political process. They want more participation. They want more empowerment. And those are themes we've seen start to develop over the last couple of general elections. And I think it's going to accelerate.
Well, we'll have to see whether this is home truly. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for being with us. And that's all the time we have for this edition of 101 East. We did invite the ruling party, the People's Action Party, to take part in our show, but our requests were turned down. Until next week, you can always follow the program through our website, podcast, and Facebook. From all the team here in Singapore, thanks for watching.